All right, hello. My name is Aaron Miller, and I will be presenting about Rett syndrome today. There we go, I can move myself. Okay, perfect. So I'm gonna have my notes over here, so if I'm looking over here, that's why. Feel free to speed up this video, whoever is watching this, because I was practicing this earlier and it took way longer than I thought it would. So feel free to make it 2 times speed or whatever. I'll try to be concise about things. So yes, today we are talking about Rett syndrome. Some questions that we're going to be answering, and these will be shown later on too. What are the educational challenges for students with Rett? What interventions should be in place? How do these interventions support the child's learning? What should parents know about the education for children with Rett syndrome? Just being in communication with the parent is very important. Why should researchers continue working in the area of low incidence needs technologies? This is something I'm going to highlight later also. And what is our role as teachers in their success journey? Because we do play a very important role in their journey. We're with them, 7 hours a day. So it's very important that we know what's going to make them successful. So just some overview of Rett syndrome. Rett syndrome is a very rare, low incidence disability. So I think the statistics said it happens in 1 in, I think it's 10,000 females. So it's very rare. And it's categorized by progressive loss of movement and motor skills, whether that's fine motor or gross motor skills. So most children with Rett are going to be using a wheelchair. And they're not going to have a lot of control over their physical. And every student's different, but there's just, for the most part, that's what you think of when you think of children with Rett. So you're also, cognitively, you're going to see progressive loss of communication skills. And we'll talk about that more later, where it's loss of interest in communication or it's actual, just not being able to figure out how to communicate. So it's just very different, and it's also an added challenge. We'll talk about this also later. I keep saying that. But children with Rett can't really use their hands to communicate. So it's really, you have to look very closely for communication, whether it's eye contact, whether it's literally leaning towards something, like this means yes, this means no, or large arm movements is another one that I have heard has been really useful for people, and then there's also technologies you can use. So again, like I said, the hand movements, you can't really rely on hand movements for communication because there's going to be a lot of repetitive and random hand gestures and movements. So it's also rarely found in males because of it is a genetic disorder. So something about the male has the XY chromosome and then the female has the XX chromosome. And that the gene that holds the Rett syndrome is passed down through that extra X chromosome. But you do find it in males sometimes, so I don't exactly know how that works. I didn't go really into that much detail with their chromosome makeup, but usually when you find it with males, it's much more severe, and it's the worst case possible. It's going to be a hard life for that child, and it's very rare that a adult male lives to be an adult. So usually males with Rett syndrome are going to be children, and they're not going to live very long, which is really sad. And then so we're also going to be talking about these stages of Rett syndrome. So symptoms may be getting worse, they may steady or lighten. It's constantly changing. It's different from child to child, and it's also going to be different within the same child. It's just very, very unique per person. So you have to be constantly evaluating the child, which we'll talk about later too. So yeah, as with any child, teachers need to be able to know how to educate all students. So that includes children with low incidence needs and intensive disorders. So when we talk about educating, teachers need to be able to sort of mind read their child a little bit. So what I mean by that is that teachers need to be kind of getting into what the child already knows, how they're going to learn best. So as we are teaching them, we're also kind of gaining knowledge about, okay, what works with them, what doesn't work, what do they already know. So with children with Rett, that's going to be really difficult unless we find a communication standard. So usually with a typical child, it will be verbal, it will be pen and paper assessment. But with children with Rett, we're going to have to kind of reevaluate how we're going to assess them and communicate with them. And we also want teachers to be keeping children safe, comfortable, and supported. And that also includes teachers' aides or assistants. I've heard that we call them teachers' assistants now, which I think is a much more dignified way of classifying that profession because it is really hard. But yeah, we need to be keeping children safe and accommodating for their needs, especially when it comes to like building like the ramps. You want to be just careful with how we physically make the room fit around that child, and also how we're going to be transporting them and what's just going to be safe for them. And there's a lot of concerns from parents, which is really interesting. I was surprised to read that, but we'll get to that later. So that's the purpose. We want teachers to be able to sort of mind read students, and we also want teachers to be keeping our children safe. So this is our research questions. I'll give you like a minute to look over them again. I'm really thirsty. All right. So I highlighted this one specifically. Why should researchers continue working in the area of low incidence needs technologies? Yeah, we really need more research I'm sure in other low incidence needs technologies as well, but like we have a lot of research in autism, and we have a lot of research in ADHD, and a lot of high incidence and learning disabilities, which is great. We also need to be working on the low incidence because those children are just as valuable as another child who has a high incidence disorder that is going to be having more research. So we want to continue advocating for that because, every child deserves to have the best educational experience and to have the best, and every parent too, because that really affects parents and families. So we need to be pushing for researchers, and there's a lot of researchers working on it now, which is good to know, but we could always use more. So my head's blocking this, but this says characteristics and needs of individuals with the disability. So the disability is Rett. So I'm going to move myself over here. Yeah, so we have some defining characteristics. A lot of parents, they will not recognize Rett syndrome until we're going to talk about these stages right here, the 4 stages. But they probably won't recognize their child's progression of Rett syndrome until rapid deterioration stage, which is really where most of the symptoms start to set in. But yeah, so a lot of parents don't really recognize that something is going on until the child starts to kind of lose interest in their toys, or lose the ability to be like maintaining eye contact or even interest in eye contact with their parents. If they have been like starting to babble a little bit, they'll kind of back off of that. So it's things that the child already was able to do, and then they start to back off, and then it's like, ooh, what's going on here? But we'll get to that. So some symptoms that you'll likely see is the loss of mobility, gross motor, fine motor. Communication skills is the big one. It's just going to be really hard to communicate with someone who can't communicate verbally or with their hands with ASL. So it's a whole different ballgame. Delayed development, you're going to have some unusual ways that the child is going to be developing. So there's something with head size. So I think the head starts, let me look really quick, slowed head growth. So that means that the head won't be growing as fast as the rest of the body is. So it's going to look a little bit unusual. Some different eye habits with children with Rett. So every child's going to be different. I just need to blanket statement that. But you'll have a lot of kids who don't want to make eye contact, or it's just not something they're thinking about. Or you have some kids that will like stare at you and stare into your soul. So it's just something that you kind of start to pick up on. And then a really, really big one is anxiety. Anxiety plagues a lot of children with Rett, and a lot of usually females with Rett, because females are going to be the majority of our children with Rett. So anxiety is going to be a huge factor, and that can lead to some issues in the classroom, behavior outbursts, irritability, and then you also have intellectual disability on top of that. Seizures is one of the biggest ones, and probably the most dangerous. So we want to, and I don't want to say it's almost definite that a child will have a seizure, but it's very unlikely that a child with Rett syndrome will not have a seizure in their life, especially during, I think it's, plateau. Yeah, plateau is really where you're going to see that a lot. Scoliosis happens sometimes, and then there's a whole laundry list of other things that could be going on too, just some minor irregularities. So yeah, we said already that it primarily affects females, so I might use the word she just as a blanket statement that she refers to a child with Rett syndrome. So 4 stages to Rett. We have early onset, rapid deterioration, plateau, and late motor deterioration. So early onset is usually the first year of life, and that is categorized with like less eye contact and the losing interest in communication that they once had. There may be delays in sitting and crawling too, which, I mean, that could mean a whole other disorder, disability list, so you kind of have to narrow it down. Rapid deterioration, that's where most parents will kind of like ding, 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 there it is. And that's where you would have the slowed head growth. You'll have the random hand movements starting. Hyperventilating is another one. So I'm assuming that is tied in with the anxiety, where that you really start to get anxious and hyperventilate. And then screaming and crying without prompt, which can, I'm sure, is so stressful. So kind of as educators, we want to be supporting our parents, who I'm sure are going through so much with trying to do the best for their child. We want to be supporting them and be coming alongside them and ultimately make them feel like they have, and they do have the power to make decisions for their child. But we want to make sure that they feel like they are having a say and they are heard, which I'm sure that's something that we could talk about later. So then the next stage we have is plateau. That's really where the crying, the random hand movements, and the communication actually might improve. They might just stay steady, or they might improve a little bit, I'm so sorry. I'm talking about plateau. Let's talk about rapid deterioration first. Rapid deterioration, yes, and that's really where parents start to notice. And so then the plateau, my brain's everywhere right now, they may improve for about 8 to 10 years. And that's really where you're going to see the majority of seizures start. So normally kids don't have seizures until this time. What time am I at? I can't even tell. And then when you move on to late deterioration stage, that's where you're going to have like the physical, like really severe physical, like weakness, muscle weakness, loss of muscle tone, and then you'll have scoliosis. More than likely, though, the girls will have scoliosis. So this is really where you have stability in the cognition. So you might have understanding skills and communication and hand movements. Intellectual disability will probably stay the same. And and even seizures will probably stay the same. And they might even, just like the plateau stage, they might even improve. So if a child had a really, really intense rapid deterioration stage where their cognition is very low and their communication is just not there, they may be able to come back from that, and they may be able to have that motivation again, which is really cool that it's so versatile. But you also have, every child is going to be different. So you're going to want to, with anxiety, we want to be maintaining emotional support for our kids, as well as our instructional time. So that includes teachers' assistants. We want to be hiring very knowledgeable and patient teachers' assistants, as well as intervention specialists and teachers who are going to be instructing. So, yeah, a lot of parents have had concerns about the lack of speech therapy for their child, and the lack of knowledge about AAC devices. AAC is augmentative and alternative communication devices. So, kids with autism use it all the time. They'll have like their phone and they'll like press a button and that means something, or that. So yeah, and I have a website that's really cool that I can pull up here in a couple minutes. So yeah, we want to be making sure that we are setting that communication as early as possible. So we want to be finding the right AAC or gesture for them, and really, if they aren't having like interest in that, it's going to be really hard to motivate them, which I'm sure can be really frustrating for both the child and the teacher. So it's going to take a lot of patience, but we could all use a little bit more patience. All right, let's see, what do we got next? Communication is the largest battle. We talked about that. So some educational challenges. We might have decreased instructional time. We're going to have a lot of communication barriers as far as like with the teacher. So instruction might not be as rich because we might not be able to delve in as deep. Like I've heard it said a lot that education and learning does not happen in a vacuum. So you're not just spitting useless information at a kid. Not that it's useless, I shouldn't say that. We're not just spitting information at a kid. We're going to be talking with them about it and discussing, and they're going to be creating out of that. So with any child, we want our children with Rett syndrome to be having that same rich education as much as possible. So to do that, we need to establish communication and break down those barriers. Decreased instructional time, that kind of just includes like the physical challenges, like going to the bathroom is going to be a long process. Getting from class to class is going to be different. And then you also, with like the behavioral anxiety, it's more than likely going to happen that you're going to have to stop instruction just to kind of ease the situation, which, it just, as long as we are supporting our students. But this can be hard. The decreased instructional time, the teacher in me gets a little bit like, oh no, because of the intellectual disability that they already may have, depending on their cognitive level. But so the decreased instructional time may kind of harm them in the future as far as cognition, but we want to keep as much, like the highest expectations we can with the highest support. So sociability, again, with the communication, and it's going to be hard for them to socialize. Or if they even want to socialize, it might just be different for them. Yeah, so you would also have, students with Rett may be having decreased interest, especially before the plateau stage. And we want to kind of get them as far along with that before they reach the plateau stage, because although they may increase their ability with that, it might be kind of a slow process. And communication can be relearned, which is really cool. It shows the plasticity of every brain. Oops, did I do that on purpose? Yeah. Okay, so this is a really cool quote. You can read it. I'm not going to read it out loud, but it just kind of opened my eyes to see, like, oh my gosh, like, we don't even know all that kids with Rett can do. Yeah, so a lot of parents are going to be pushing for AAC technology, and the easiest way, I didn't mention this earlier, I can't believe I didn't do that. The easiest way to be having augmentative and alternative communication for kids with Rett is going to be eye tracking technology, which I think is so interesting. Like, you have like your eyes, and it's literally tracking, like, it's going to be able to say yes or no. So if kids, and I don't think blindness is really a common thing with Rett syndrome, most kids with Rett are going to be able to see. So, I mean, if it's as easy for them as talking is for us to be using their eyes, whatever we can do to be supporting them. And students range from wanting to interact but cannot. Then you also have kids who are wanting to interact and then they can figure out how to interact and communicate. And then you have kids with like no interest in interacting, and then they don't, which is really can be really hard. And I don't really think much learning can happen at that point because, again, learning does not happen in a vacuum. So yeah, this quote is why we need ongoing research. And that was one of the big questions, why we need ongoing research, why we need to be pushing for educators or researchers to be learning about this, is because we may be on the cusp of learning about Rett syndrome and what's going on in the brain. So yes, some adaptations and modifications for our kids. We want to assess our students for cognitive ability. We want to assess them for fine motor skills, gross motor skills, learning fatigue, stress factors, and anxiety levels. And we want students to be interacting with their peers as much as possible. And we also want that to, as much as possible, we want that to be a positive interaction. So there's some students who will benefit from that, and there's some that aren't. And I have a family member who's a teacher, and she's told me stories about there's kids who just don't open up, and they're just like not really feeling it in the gen ed classroom, and it's an inclusive school. And then once they have their like hour in the resource room, in the sped room, they totally come out of their shell for the rest of the day. And it's interesting that individual time, because we want the least restricted environment as possible, but we also don't want to be going completely opposite where we're harming the child by swinging the pendulum too far one way. So you got to be careful with that and just be judging each student individually. Yeah, and children are going to be changing, especially children with Rett. The stages are just going to be up and down all the time. So you want to be like evaluating them either in your brain or like writing it down, evaluating them and kind of figuring out, like, I mean, maybe even weekly, maybe daily, what they need to be doing and what needs to be their goal almost. And we'll talk about 504s and IEPs later as well. Next, we're going to be talking about educational strategies and support services. So our teaching methods and strategies. There's 2 communication assessments that have actually come forth and been proven effective. And that's really, really important. And really, like, I mean, I don't know if I talked about this before, but we had a hard time figuring out if what we were assessing for our children with Rett was actually valid. So was it assessing what it was supposed to be doing? So when we talk about intellectual disability, maybe kids with Rett don't even have intellectual disability. It's just our assessments aren't assessing what they're supposed to be, and it's not fitting for the child. So there's actually 2 assessments, the Inventory for Potential Communicative Acts, or IPCA, and the Communication Matrix. So those are 2 strategies that we could be using. which is really cool. So we want to be introducing AAC, which again is augmentative or alternative communication. We want to be introducing. What is that? We want to be introducing that as soon as possible. So sorry about that. I had a little message pop up that I only have 5 minutes left. So we're going to go fast. So we want to be introducing communication devices as soon as possible. And again, it may be just gestures. They can't really use their hands for ASL, so it might be moving their head, or it might be leaning, or it might be eye tracking technology. Or if they can press a button on a screen, that's great too. We want to just do whatever they need us to do, and kind of figure that out for them, especially if they're younger. Like, we can't be making them do that by themselves. So next we're going to be talking about our curriculum modifications and differentiation. So there's another quote up there that's good to keep in mind. So with our children with Rett, we want to keep that in mind. We want to keep in touch with the least restricted environment as well, and be in constant communication with our parents, making sure that Free and Public Education Act also, which is FAPE, we want to make sure that FAPE also means quality education, not just free and public. We want to keep it quality education. So, I think I said that wrong. Free and public. I think it's something else. But anyway, we want to basically the message of that. We want to make sure that our kids are getting the quality education that they deserve. And so we're going to be talking about how we can collaborate as teachers. So our SPED teachers, gen ed teachers, speech therapists, occupational therapists, teachers assistants, we need to be working together and with our parents, which is huge. Our parents are just going to be trying to advocate for their kid, and we need to be right there with them. So a 504 versus IEP, that is a question that I had to look up. And an IEP basically is a specific goal in a formal document that needs to be brought up to the parent before it is changed. So we need to be meeting with the parent before it's changed. A 504 plan is going to be a much less formal and it's not even a document. It's I think I actually have seen it as a document, but it doesn't need to be a formal document. Basically, with minor changes, you don't have to change it, or you don't have to bring it up to the parent beforehand, because and it covers a much broader spectrum of needs, where IEP is going to be specific learning disability, 504 is going to be like very broad. So say like my student needs, I don't know, like tape on the bottom of his shoe so he can grip, or he needs some sort of wristband that can calm him down. I'm not going to talk to the parent before, like, hey, can I put this wristband on him? No, I'm going to do it in the moment. I'm going to let the parent know, be like, hey, this is what we did, this is what worked, this is what didn't work. In a 504, you don't really have to be as vigilant with that. I'm going to check my time really quick. Some modifications that we can do. Speech therapy, we want to be emphasizing speech therapy very much. I don't think our kids with Rett are going to be able to be speaking, but as far as communication, they can really help with that. Occupational therapy, obviously. We talked about how we want to be including the learning process, which is going to be back and forth communication discussion while learning, because learning is not going to happen if I'm just talking to the kid. It's going to be back and forth discussion. It's going to be manipulatives, and so keeping that in mind is huge. Some legal and ethical and policy considerations in SPED. We had the IDEA Act, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So that really was in congruence with the IEP mandates. And the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, Section 504, is what the 504